Good morning and welcome to this, the third in our four-part series on operational resilience. If you've missed the first two, they are available, and this one is also being recorded. The final one will be in 2 weeks' time on Tuesday again at 10:30. Okay, so today's webinar is on process mapping. I don't think we'll need the full hour, but I'll speak for about a half an hour and we'll have time for questions. So depending on the number of questions then afterwards, we'll determine the length, but we should finish in under the hour. Briefly, I will give a quick introduction. I think at this stage, most of you know us, but we continue to add a few new faces. And then we get down to business. Like, what is critical or important when it comes to business services, and whose definition is it anyway? How do you identify dependencies? Things that might go wrong and you might need to react quickly. We look at capturing the end-to-end chain of activities, because I think that is the only really sure way of understanding exactly what the dependencies are, what the risks are in any service delivery. And we look at identifying those vulnerabilities. And then when you understand all of that, what are the impact tolerance metrics that you would set for each service? What's the minimum level of disruption that will be acceptable? Okay. First of all, to us, a brief introduction. We see ourselves as experienced risk and compliance professionals, and we try to maintain our skills sharp by being members of various organisations like the Institute of Risk Management, Institute of Bankers, Compliance Ireland, etc. So that when we do talk to you, that we can be, when we can understand the challenges that you face and maybe help you find a solution. We provide a GRC solution called calQrisk, the application. It's a cloud-based software, and many of you are customers. We also provide a risk advisory service. Now, that can be in the form of an annual contract, or it can be bespoke, project-based, depending on what your needs are. Today, calQrisk is used by over 3,000 users, and I think even that figure is probably underestimating at this stage. But generally in financial services organizations, and I know many of you, most of you are financial service organizations, but also in the not-for-profit sector like housing associations, charities, and sports organizations. So that's us. I like Warren Buffett. He's always good for a quote, and still going strong at, what, 93. Risk comes from not knowing what you are doing. Well, certainly if you don't know what you're doing, you're carrying a lot of risk. But I thought it was succinct. And today, I would say by doing the process mapping, you will understand better what you're doing. You'll understand better how your services have been delivered, and maybe you'll identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities that you were not aware of yesterday. So let's have a look. I thought, again, to give it context, we'll talk about resilience, because it's process mapping in the context of resilience. And I put up there my preferred definition of resilience. It's about the ability to deliver critical operations through disruption. So not interrupted and then delivered again, but to be able to deliver through a disruption, or at least without anybody recognizing that you've had a disruption. Now, you won't be able to deliver everything through disruption, but if you can deliver the critical ones, that's ultimately what you're trying to achieve here. Now, resilience is an outcome, I think, of multiple functions. And just as a reminder, risk management, that you identify the risks and prevent the disruptions in the first place, and at least have mitigants in place. But if you are disrupted, you have a plan. Information security, because of the complexity of IT these days and the constant threat of attack, of cyber attack, that needs focus on its own. Hence, I pull it out as a separate discipline. How you handle an incident, whether it's a crisis or whether it's a small incident, will determine certainly the duration of that disruption and whether it stays as a minor incident and doesn't become a crisis. Many of you already have good business continuity plans, and certainly resilience would look to build on those continuity plans across the board. And if you do have a major disaster, it's not the time to start thinking about what's in a disaster recovery plan. I'm not talking about recovering from a small incident. I'm talking about recovering from a serious disruption. Okay. When you put them in context and put them on in a timeline diagram, you can see that those different functions impact at different times. I think the process mapping cuts across all of these, and that's what I've tried to highlight here with the highlight yellow there. That it's not in any one discipline, it's across all of them. And I think when you start mapping out your processes, you should be involving people from all of the disciplines. I hope that becomes clear as we go through this. So that's the context. I thought, again, to set the scene, imagine you have a disruption, and let's say it came from a power loss. Well, if you've got a generator and it's working and it kicks in, then you're all good. You're up and running more or less straight away. The PCs might not be on the generator or on the UPS, so they might be power cycled, but you're back up and running in minutes. And the key systems weren't down at all, so you're good. But if the generator fails, or if you've no generator, then you're down to your UPS, your uninterruptible power supply. Hopefully that'll keep your systems going until the power is back, unless it's a longer power outage, in which case you might have to go into emergency switch down and control switch down of the servers. You might even have to evacuate the building if you've lost power to the building and it's in darkness. I wanted to get you to the state of where you've no power. And you got to think, how is your service delivery impacted? Now think of the power in the building you're in, think of the power in the data center where your critical systems are. And imagine, try to put yourself in that place, how the service delivery is impacted, and who cares, and who's affected, and who's going to be calling you first. Because you need to, and this is what I'm trying to get to, you need to define what's a critical or important business service that you're providing. Now, I've put up here 3 definitions from different regulators, and I'm not going to read them all out, but the definitions primarily are aimed at, I think, primarily the impact to service delivery disruption on your part has on the sector, you know, to the customers that you serve and to the wider elements of maybe the financial sector that you're in. Yes, the regulator is worried about how it might threaten your stability and your safety, your soundness and survivability. The FCA is, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, has a much more tighter definition. Services, if disrupted, could potentially cause intolerable harm to the consumers of the service or to the market integrity. That's a very succinct one. And Basel tends to focus its definition on the larger banks and the disruption to the financial system. Now, certainly the regulator will want you to consider that, and if you wanted a small number of services from this, trying to identify the critical ones, you probably all have a smaller number than what you might consider critical. I think this is the number one question that people ask is, what is critical or important? My reading of, from the regulator's point of view, is the material impact on external parties, on the other players in the market. If you're a supplier to a larger bank or banks, and the service you're delivering, you can't deliver anymore. It's the impact, if you're clearing a clearinghouse, if you're handling settlements, payments, imagine if you're not delivering that, you affect a lot of other institutions as well. That's, I would say, number one what the regulator is concerned about. Now, it could be specific that you impact one other player or you impact many other players. If the service you're providing is a key cog, if you like, in that in the whole financial services sector, then the knock-on effects could be quite damaging for the sector. Then certainly it's critical and it's important. I've seen this several places about taking an outcomes-based approach. Just don't think of the immediate maybe impact, but the outcome of if you're unable to deliver the service for any significant period of time, what is the outcome? Now, having said all of that, right, and certainly I would say you need to identify those critical or important services, certainly to the sector, and how it can damage others. If it damages you, it's damaging the sector. If it damages the sector, it's damaging you. You're part of that sector. But you might start by trying to identify, I suppose, all of your services, and then the ones that are critical to your strategic plans, and then maybe the ones that are important for the sector, and tier them as to the most critical for the sector and then critical for you. I think the FCA have very helpfully given you 10, 11 factors here to consider when you're considering what's critical or important. And it might help to clear the mind, you know, the nature of the client base. I mean, is the client base, is it other banks? Is it, are they hedge funds? Are they, you know, is the client the consumer, the average person at home? If you're a bank and your clients are your account holders, but the ability of the clients to obtain the service from other providers. So if it's the case that they can quickly change, then maybe if you can't deliver the service, the impact is minimal because you've 10 other providers in the market that can quickly step in. It could be the number of clients that you're providing this to. If you're, you know, think about it, if you're providing it to 1,000 clients or 100,000, the impact then is obviously greater and would be more strongly felt certainly if 100,000 clients are affected. If it's sensitive data that you're holding, you know, doing wealth management and you have a lot of personal client data, if that is that might be a factor in determining what's critical, what's important. I think the large one, though, is the impact on the financial system. Now, the last three here, you can see it's about your own firm's viability and maybe the reputational damage to it. I mean, I would consider those as well. I would certainly be considering what's critical to, you know, our company objectives. It mightn't be critical to the market, but it's critical to you. So certainly, why do this exercise and only pick out the ones that are important to the sector? If it's for regulatory compliance, you're doing this, then it's a small number you have to identify, I think, in most organizations. But it's a good thing to do, this process mapping. So I would start with identifying them all. Now, the last one here is whether a breach or a disruption could mean that you're in breach of some obligation, whether it's a contract, a legal obligation that you've entered into, or indeed a regulatory one that by the very nature of your business, yes, you would be in breach if disrupted. So I think the next step, if you have identified, I'm going to say all of your services and then identified those that are critical, you have to determine what are critical. And you have to be able to explain to the regulator your criteria for determining critical. So let's say you're past that point and you've identified the services. Now you want to identify the dependencies, because if you're going to identify where the weaknesses are, where the vulnerabilities are, and where it can maybe break, you certainly need to know in detail the nature and the extent of the activity. You know, the products, the service that you're offering, whether it's clearinghouse, settlement, a bank account, loans, whatever it is, the nature of the customers for this service. How is it delivered? Is it online? Is it in person? Is it through others, through third parties? how could it be disrupted? Is it just a power thing, a unable to provide the service because systems are not available? Is it people that you need? Is it third parties that you need to deliver it? I think you need to understand the chain of activities, and we'll talk about that in a moment, about understanding exactly the steps along the chain to deliver that service. Because if you're going to identify the vulnerabilities, you need to understand each individual step. The resources required to deliver it, and their importance, and again, whether they're internal resources or external. Who owns this? Who owns the service? And certainly you'd like to see in every organization that somebody owns it, because if they own it, hopefully they're focused on ensuring it's working all of the time. Now, the dependencies, no surprises here, the people, the process, the technology. Think of information as well that you require to deliver it, because we think of IT, we think of the T, the technology part of it, but it's generally technology that is processing information. So think of that. Facilities and third parties. Do you need the internet? Do you need a particular premises to deliver the service? Do you need a particular third party or parties? I think when you're identifying the dependencies, I would be including everybody involved in the delivery of the service, so you get the fullest picture possible in identifying them. Now, I imagine that many of you will already have done a BIA, a business impact analysis, as part of your business continuity. So you probably have done this for a lot of your critical stuff, at least already. This is just a very simple form that you might do in Excel on identify the process, the activity, the service, whatever level of granularity you want to go. Who owns it? The response person. Maybe comments on how it's delivered, where it's delivered, maybe critical time periods, and then the system dependencies and other dependencies. This is a very simple form for capturing basic information, and I think it's a starting point. I think many of you have this already. The last few columns there, the maximum tolerable outage. How long can you afford not to be delivering the service? Recovery point objective goes down. How quickly do you need it to be restored after you press the button? It will be generally always less than MTO. And then I put in 12, 24, 48, 72 hours and put in a rating here as to how severe the impact is after 12 hours, 24, 48. Now, you can pick these. It could be, if you're an internet payments company, you're probably picking these in terms of minutes, so that you might have this already. So you're already, I would say, a good way along the road in identifying the dependencies. But take the time, especially for the critical ones, to capture the end-to-end chain of activities in delivering a particular service. Now, you can do this in document form, listing each step, and it might be as pedestrian as that, and I've seen these. And this is an easy one. It's 9 steps, and you probably still have the overview. But imagine if there's 29 or 49 steps in delivering a service. This isn't... well, for me, it's not visual enough. I prefer the visual, something like this. And this is done with the BPMN, Business Process Management. Excuse me. Okay. A tool that allows you to, sorry. Okay, that's better. Something that will allow you to capture each individual step on the process. Now, I was a convert to this a long time ago, and I've found many times that when you start drawing out the process, and we used to do this on paper on white walls before software was available. But when you've got that visual as to the process, you'll identify a lot more vulnerabilities and gaps in your process, and maybe cul-de-sacs and things you hadn't considered. So I would encourage you to, whatever works for you, but I would encourage the visual. So how do you identify the vulnerabilities? I suppose there are several techniques. Risk assessment, and this is why I was saying the process mapping cuts across the different disciplines, but certainly in risk assessment, You've identified the risks, what could go wrong, what controls could fail. Inspections and audits. If it's a third party, certainly you might do an inspection. If it's your own process and you do an audit, pair of independent eyes will often identify things that somebody who's too close to the woods can't see. I think a source of information that is often overlooked is those incidents and near misses that are telling you, on a daily, weekly basis that the process isn't perfect. And if it has failed, you should be understanding, well, why did we have a near miss? Because, the near misses could be just precursors to a bigger incident. So certainly learn from those. And in another webinar, we talked about lessons learned from incidents. This is what we all should be doing. Always this continuous improvement and learning from near misses and incidents. Know the pinch points or the critical times, because that's when maybe things will break. If it's a particular time of the month where you're busier, or a particular time during the week. Know your capacity, because often things break when you get busy and you're working at your maximum capacity. Is this something that could cause the service to stutter or fail? And if you do get busy and busier, quicker and faster than you had originally anticipated, what's your ability to expand the capacity, or does it just break? Have you thought about what if? The other side of that, then, the vulnerabilities, the time critical. If you have to complete things by a certain time or date, certainly be looking at that and be looking at, how close to the wind you might be sailing in that. The lack of slack. If you're able to handle the normal everyday volumes, but Friday afternoon at 4:30, the volumes double or treble. Can you cope? And have you enough slack? Can you divert resources to that? My colleague calls these things time chicanes, where there's maybe a day in the month or a half an hour in the week where there's a huge concentration of orders, of clearing, of settlements, of stuff that has to be done by a particular time. And if it's all going through a single point of failure, whether it's a person or whether it's a system, and if it's a system, do you have the elasticity? Can you spin up more processing power so that can cope? And if it's one system and that should fail, are you going to be down for a long time? Maybe you need mirrored systems if it's that critical. Certainly, I'm sure many of you do have multiple redundant systems. Single person dependency. Often we forget about this, that it only works if John or Mary are actually in the building. This is often overlooked, that single person dependency. Or single third party. We throw the parcel over the wall and assume that the third party has the capacity and the everything else that we've listed here, the systems, the redundancy to handle it. Well, have you checked? And it's interesting that the regulators, one of the questions they ask you is the substitutability of, third parties. Is it easy? Is it difficult? Is it impossible? You should know that for yourself, never mind for the regulator, so that certainly if it's difficult or impossible, then you're looking for a higher level of resilience, I would imagine, from that individual third party. And so on to impact tolerance metrics. Because nothing will work 100% of the time. But it's if you're going to build in redundancy, good. If you're going to build in a good incident response program, this should be dictated by the importance, how critical the service is, and how I suppose the maximum outage time that is tolerable. So you need to set that. Now, I thought, how would you do this? You might say, well, what is it today? and try and get an estimate of, if the system went down, how long would it take us to recover and bring it back up and running again? And then ask yourself, is that acceptable? Or you could take a blank sheet of paper and say, what if, and what would be acceptable, and can we operate within those metrics? But you need to define this for each critical or important business service. It's not one for all. I think do it for each individual one, because again, there's so many factors involved. It could be what you've promised or contracted or obligated to do in some way that will set the maximum, not something that you dream up. It could already be contracted. You might decide, because of the reputation damage to you, that there's certain limits that you will not exceed because of your belief that that will irreparably damage your reputation. They need to be informed by the risks present. Now, think of risks in terms of continuity, confidentiality, availability, integrity of the data, maybe the fines or compensation you might have to pay out if you're unable to deliver a service. I think you need to consider these also in conjunction with the restore schedule. If you have a significant disaster and multiple systems or services are disrupted, which ones are more important, and what is the restore schedule? There might be just a limit on what you can restore in a certain time frame. So understand that restore schedule and the complexity in that. That'll be probably in your business continuity plan already. You probably have that restore schedule. Now, the metrics can be qualitative or quantitative. That's what the regulator says, but they say have at least one time-based metric. I prefer the quantitative ones, but and here are a few. The first three are fairly well known, I would say, by you all. Certainly, anybody who's done a business continuity plan will have maximum tolerable outage. That's the short one, or maximum period of disruption, or tolerable period of disruption. I prefer MTO, maximum tolerable outage. And then the recovery time objective. And often people get confused between the two, but let me put it this way. If you have a disruption at 8 o'clock this morning and you don't press the button on the recovery plan until 9 o'clock, you've already lost an hour. And the RTO, if that is 2 hours, means your MTO is 2 + 1. Think of it this way: the RTO is always less than the MTO, and the reason it's less is it takes sometimes time, and I've seen it. I've always tended to have RTO half the MTO because organizations take too long to make that decision to go to the recovery plan. So the people who have to recover know they've got an RTO. They need to be able to recover from when green light is given or the button is pressed to where the recovery is complete. That's the RTO. And the recovery point objective is basically how much data can you afford to lose? You know, can you go back to last night's backup if you have a disaster, disruption at 5 to 5 today? You might say, no, we can't lose any data, you know, maximum 2 minutes. You know? Well, all of this is possible, you know, at a price. So you decide what's important for you and if you can afford it. Now, I've only put up 6 examples here of metrics. Your business, your services will determine what the appropriate metrics are, but it might be the number of customers impacted. It might be the number of transactions affected by the disruption or the transaction value. But these are just ideas. You need to pick, and you don't need 25 metrics. You need a handful of metrics that everybody understands and can work towards. So my final slide. Just try to summarize, I guess. So list the services you provide. Identify those that are critical, and I'm sent to this sector because this is the one that everybody outside of your organization is interested in, particularly the regulator. But identify those that are critical to your objectives as well. Why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you set impact tolerance metrics for those as well. Understand how the services are delivered in detail, and it is worth taking the time to understand it in detail, because you will spot the weak points, the dependencies, and the vulnerabilities. And if you know the vulnerabilities, then you can do something about them. Set achievable targets for, I would say, recovery from a disruption, or indeed if these are critical services, then you're probably aiming at I'm going to say close to zero. Well, you need to test that as well. But yeah, set achievable targets, and remember that if you're a board member and you're setting these high targets, there is a cost. So, set I would say achievable and reasonable targets. So that's it. Just one piece of information. We're doing workshops now. These are 2-hour sessions on resilience, and we're taking each of the disciplines, I would say, under resilience in detail, and we've grouped a few of them here together, but we've taken the 6, and we're doing it over 4 workshops over 6 weeks, 2 weeks apart, and 2 hours each session. There is a charge and a discount if you're a customer. So I'm going to open this up to questions. I see there is one. Hi, Jared. Great insights. Quick question. We have a master outsourcing agreement in place with our group in Eastern Europe and rely on this master service agreement for about 15 services locally. How would you map these, i.e. 1 critical and 15 important? Cheers. Okay. The services that are provided intra-group are special because not because the regulator wants you to identify which ones are intergroup, but special because it's not like a third party that you can say, if you're not delivering the service to the level that I want, I'm going elsewhere. So you've got to figure out how do you ensure, one, that you're getting the service level that you require for your market, especially if you're one of, I'm going to say, one of a half a dozen of players in that group that is getting the service from this intragroup. So how would you map these? Well, there's a big block in that mapping, isn't there, of the service being performed by the third-party group. I would say, I mean, you say you've 15 services. I would rank them, and certainly the ones that are critical, I would seek to understand the process at the intragroup level. I think you need to. I don't think you can just throw that parcel over the wall and hope. Ultimately, if you're responsible for it, then you should understand how it is delivered. And I was reminded last week of an organization, a third party that had outsourced to a fourth party, and the fourth party was in an Eastern European country, and they were told basically to cease operations by their regulator because of money laundering irregularities, and that fourth party then couldn't deliver the service to the third party, and it had to do with producing payment cards. And a number of organizations were impacted in Ireland. So certainly I think you need to be looking at the greater detail. And if it's an intra-group, I'm sure that they will share that with you, or at least they should. Okay. Hopefully I've answered that question, but that would be my feeling, that it might be intra-group, but if you're still responsible for delivering the service, assume you shouldn't be in your vocabulary. You can't say, well, I assumed it was being looked after. I think ultimately, if you're responsible, then you have an obligation and a right to know exactly how it's delivered. Any other questions? We do have time. We don't have to use all the time. I'll just tell you one personal story from this. When I took over a department and I asked the people to map out the processes, their initial response was a groan because they thought, oh, it's paperwork, and just let us go and do it. But once they did the first one and mapped it out, and they used a mapping tool, they used a visual to actually used Visio, they were convinced, and I didn't have to push that anymore. And they mapped out every single process they were doing. Now we're talking about of the order of 10 or 12. But they found out things about the processes that they didn't know. And it was, again, as I said, through that visual tool rather than it listed out in instructions, because I think most of us readily can absorb the information faster and spot gaps. So I would say try it, folks. Try doing it visually. Okay. I know it's a fairly short one, and I hope it's fairly succinct, and I hope I've given you some insight, but it isn't rocket science, is it? I mean, it's fairly understandable. And if you understand the process in detail, then you'll understand the risks and the vulnerabilities, etc. So hopefully that was of some benefit to you. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So I shall give you back 23 minutes of your time today. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you all back here again in 2 weeks' time at 10:30 on Tuesday, the 27th. Thank you. Bye-bye.